You are listening to the Enormocast.
When it comes to Sportiva, I often praise the longevity of their venerated classics like the Mira. Because, well, if it ain't Baroque, don't fix it. Italian Baroque, that is. But as we know, I'm a stick in the mud whose glory days are well behind him. But you, dear listener, still have your best days waiting to jump out at you like a puppy wearing a backpack full of caramel corn. So hey, forward thinkers, let's take a gander at what's new over at Sportiva.com. The redesigned Cantana lace is an absolute edging machine. The updated Tarantula line provides comfort and performance at a price point for everybody. The TX2 Evo adds even more performance to Sportiva's stow and go approach shoes. And the new Mantra is a minimalist slipper so light and flowy, you'll swear you accidentally showed up to the gym in only your underwear. Just like in that dream you had last night. Don't worry, I just looked down too. So when it comes to keeping you thinking ahead, Sportiva is there with innovation at every turn. Why not see what's up and head over to Sportiva.com or follow them on Instagram. And remember, Sportiva is a proud sponsor of the Enormocast. Do you like compliments? Compliments are good, right? From the outright, straight-to-your-face statements of praise to the knowing look and slight chin jut from your favorite bro at the gym, compliments can turn your frown upside down in an instant. And hands down, of all the gear I peddle on the Enormocast, the item that receives the most out-of-the-blue compliments are the splitter hats from PeterWGilroy.com. You know, the ones with the titanium plaques and badges. That's right, titanium on a hat. Peter started making these hats a few years ago and has kept the styles coming with designs inspired by the great mountain ranges of the world. So if you're one of those people with a head, go to PeterWGilroy.com and check out the splitter hats and all the wearable art that Peter creates. Even better, receive a discount and help out the Enormocast by entering Enormo at checkout. That's PeterWGilroy.com and enter Enormo at checkout.
Listen, where are you playing in town? You playing here?
We're doing the Enormo Dome, whatever it is. It's terrific.
Oh,
it's
yeah,
big
place
sold it
outside
out.
of town. That's a big
nice.
place. You sold it out.
20,000 seats.
You
really should.
Look, you better get up there before you panic. Those pens are loose. You're very good. I have really enjoyed playing with you. We'll make it. I don't think so. But we shall continue with style. Bad weather. Now or later, anytime.
Today's show is brought to you by Black Diamond Equipment, La Sportiva, and with support from Maxim Ropes. Maxim has been keeping the Enormocast off the deck since 2012.
And don't forget our charter sponsor, Bonfire Coffee. Go to bonfirecoffee.com and enter Enormo at checkout for a discount on great coffee and to support the Enormocast.
And now back to the show.
Hello and welcome to the Enormocast. This is your host, Chris Kalous. It is May 17th, about 9:30 in the morning here in Colorado, 2022. And this is episode 242 of the Enormocast, a conversation with Scott Franklin. So yeah, this is right in my 80s fetish wheelhouse. Do you know the name Scott Franklin? Anybody my age that's been climbing as long as I have totally knows Scott Franklin. Maybe some of you have heard the name. He's another guy who changed climbing in fundamental ways in the 80s, early 90s. But for whatever reason, we just forgot the 80s. Forgot all the stuff that went down, even though, as I've said before, what the climbers of the 80s did was pretty much codify what we do as climbers these days. Eschewing taboos against hang-dogging, getting rid of yo-yoing, coming up with the red point, coming up with some of the sort of rules of what it means to have sent a climb. For better or worse, I guess. You know, all those rules, keeping us down, the man. Anyhow, Scott Franklin coming up on the Enormocast. But first, a gentle reminder, just a gentle one. Just going to ease in here real close. Rub your shoulders a little bit. This isn't going to hurt at all. Maybe you feel a little pinch, but that's it. I and the keynote speaker at the International Climbers Festival in Lander, Wyoming, 14th to the 17th of July. Tickets on sale at climbersfestival.org. Myself, James K.G. Kagambi, Brittany Goris, Hayden Jameson, talking about climbing on a stage. Fabulous. Lots of other stuff going on. Clinics, parties, trade fairs, art walks. Just a good time to be in Lander. Yeah, that wasn't so bad, now was it? Okay, with that behind us, let's get to this interview with Scott Franklin. Scott Franklin straddled the old school in the Gunks, no hang-dogging, lower off every time you fall, pull the rope, start again, all the way through the sport climbing revolution, starting up there, for the most part in the U.S., in Smith Rocks. But Scott went on to climb all over the country, basically just coming to your town and doing the hardest route, either putting it up or repeating it, and then leaving a wake of jaws dropped. Drop jaws laying all over the place. But that's what Scott did, also known as Scotty Franklin for the longest time. I don't know when he dropped the Scotty. Maybe he got to a certain age and he was like, enough of that. Nevertheless, he had the skills to pay the bills. He started out in trad, doing scary stuff, placing small gear, taking big whippers, even free soloing up to 513, and then moved right on through the sport climbing era and became the best sport climber in the United States and close to the best sport climber in the world, actually. I don't know what he did as a boulderer himself, but he started Franklin Climbing, which were some of the first people to make bouldering specific gear like pads and whatnot. So he was in that revolution as well. Such an important figure in climbing, helped create the way that we climb today. And after raising a family, starting another successful business, Lumos Solar, he's still just as psyched on climbing as he always has been. Didn't get grumpy and disappear. Still after it. All right, let's get to it. But you know what? I had to break out one last time. This will be the last time you ever hear it. The classic Dawn Patrol commercial. It's a little dated, but the fact that Black Diamond lets me do this sort of stuff just makes me giggle. I hope it makes you giggle too.
Well, howdy, buckaroos. It's springtime, and them foals are kicking, and the sun's coming up earlier and earlier, which only means one thing. Your Dawn Patrol's gonna have to start earlier too. Let's face it, the only thing better than first tracks is first gram. That's right. Your sick shit should be the first thing them losers that stayed up all night binge-watching Tiger King see in their feed. Right as that first sip of Joe from a to-go cup dribbles inevitably down their chins. Damn, they'll think. Sending V3 at 4 a.m.? That is sick. Well, Black Diamond has everything you need for a proper Dawn Patrol mission. Headlamps to light the hallway as you sneak out. The perfect layering system to peel when you start to get as moist as a newborn lamb. They got ski gear for skiers who aren't over it yet, and climbing gear for overstoked climbers like us. And even bouldering pads, because truth is, morning Mountain Dew sounds great if you want to punch your hand through a car window, but it sucks for actual pebble wrestling. So let Black Diamond support your morning mania and that inevitable drop in productivity by 1 p.m. because they literally make every damn thing a climber needs, except the caffeine. Wake up and head over to blackdiamondequipment.com or your favorite local shop for all the gear you need on your next Dawn Patrol. And you know, Black Diamond loves this damn podcast.
Let's go back to the Gunks. And the cool thing, at least about the stuff I learned about you and the Gunks, is that one of the formidable things that happened was that you had a crew and you had a few young, really strong friends that drove you, I think. And that was like, and that's another like really, you know, common but exciting part of like climbing, where these energy units, if you will, like got together and like pushed each other. So can you talk a little bit about that crew and who you were climbing with basically when you were a kid? You know, I'm thinking of Jordan Mills Al Diamond are the two that jump right
exactly.
out,
Yeah,
right?
that's the crew for sure.
So talk about that crew coalescing and what it did for like your attitude towards climbing and how it drove you.
You know, looking back at that time, I mean, Jordan and Al and I were definitely a crew. You know, I'm trying to remember how we even met. Thinking back, it's so long ago.
Right.
You know, but I think when we met each other, we realized like we were definitely kind of on the same path. We're just completely fired up about climbing. We all kind of came from, you know, I lived in New York City, so did Al. Jordan was from New Jersey, but we all met in the Gunks. Yeah, we just hit it off right away. And it was a match made in heaven. You know, we were on the same program totally. And we all were going to school at SUNY New Paltz, more or less. And
as it goes.
Right. And you know, I remember we just started climbing together, and we were, as you said, I mean, really pushing each other. We met, and we were probably at different stages. You know, probably climbing like 511s. We were getting through the, you know, the kind of early classics at the Gunks at that point, and you know, pushing up to 11 plus, and starting to get into climbing 512 was like the big. That's kind of when we met. Really, we were kind of right on the verge of getting to our first 512s. And this is probably 1983, 84, something like that. Can't remember exactly. And, you know, I remember like for us, everything, all the benchmarks were like Gunks routes. You know, it wasn't like you could go to Rifle and do like the easiest 12A and then the next 5 12As. There was Kansas City, there was Gravity's Rainbow. There's only a few routes you could do, to have or have not, stuff like that. And we just worked our way through those. Those were the routes. And the style was you climb up and try and do it. And if you fall off, you lower to the ground. You can leave the rope up there, but you got to start from the ground again. You try again. That was the game. And that's what we did. And then, you know, then we got through some of those routes, and then it just kind of spiraling from there. And I remember first trips were like, we realized, you know, the problem with the Gunks is the weather's terrible. Like it's mostly bad. It's more like terrible most of the year. And there's two weeks of the year where it's the best place in the world. And
there's some British climbers going like, you don't even know what you're talking
exactly.
about.
Exactly. Well, the Brits totally can relate, you know? Yeah. But we were like literally climbing the walls, and we shared an apartment, some kind of student apartment, just disgusting place. And, you know, I remember so the early climb wall, we like nailed some, you know, little blocks of wood on the wall, climbing the walls, literally climbing the walls because we were going so crazy because the weather was so bad. And that's kind of where it all started.
Right. You know, 1983, you've got 512 in the Gunks. You know, you just talked about Rifle, like going and doing a 12A in Rifle. It's, you know, it's a whole different like thing, right? That's like entry level now, you know? And so to try to put it in perspective, I mean, you guys were climbing up towards cutting edge climbing at the time, maybe not the very top, but you're getting into the elite.
Right. We were in the mix for sure. Yeah.
So you got this crew of young kids, and I'm kind of curious because you've got this really traditional place, this Gunks, right? Like one of the Yosemite Boulder Gunks was like these places in the 50s even, like where shit was going down. And so you had mentors, you had older like gunkies who were like on board, it sounds like. Typically when you've got a bunch of young kids who are like just amping their way through stuff, you also get a little bit of pushback from the old guard. Was there both of that?
There was. It was funny. We were, you know, when we were kind of coming up in that sort of 512 zone, we were really kind of getting into the game. We were really our own little bubble. We didn't really interact with like the super elites, you know, right. Kloon and Grunberg and Hugh Herr was still, you know, really active there. We knew about them.
Interacting with Hugh Herr, I think, is difficult.
Yeah, when I
tried to interact with them, it was
it's challenging, different issues. But we were aware of them, and I think the interesting thing was we had the attitude of like, you know, we knew what the standards were, so we're like, oh well, we can do that. You know, like okay, that's what those guys are doing, so that's where that was the starting point. Mm-hmm. So for us, the idea of like, you know, we thought of, so for example, Kansas City is like that's a good first 512. You know, looking back, I think people call it 12B now, you know, and I'm sure it's not like doing, you know, defenseless betties and Rifle. It's a lot more of a program, you know, like 2 pins and a roof or whatever. You know, the routes are a little more old school.
Engaging.
A little more engaging, typically, and probably more physical and brutal in a lot of ways, typical Gunks. But at that time, though, we were definitely in our own little bubble, and really, we didn't kind of cross paths and kind of get into that next level with the Clunes, Grunberg, et cetera, until I think really that kind of time we intersected with them was when I was putting up Survival of the Fittest. That's when we first like kind of really our worlds kind of met.
Sure.
And it was cool. I mean, we felt like, wow, we're like really part of the scene now. Like
Right.
we were definitely, and I think at that point we realized like we're part of the driving force here. Like we're the ones setting the new standard.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's pretty cool. And I know Russ really well and just love him and admire him. And, you know, he was a world climber like that. That's, I think, one of the hallmarks of what he kind of did was break out of that place, you know, and go elsewhere. And because a lot of times, you know, it becomes very insular if that's, you know, you can be the sort of guy on the beat and just make sure that stays that way and nobody messes with your, like, you know, your attitudes. But breaking out is like a super important part of that. And I think to look at what you guys started doing, because you started going to Europe and looking around the rest of the country, was that like an influence of Clunes? Like what, or was it just natural to be like, all right, we've set our mark here, let's get going? But it seems of that crew we're talking about, you know, you were the guy that really decided to do it.
Well, I was probably, you know, of me, Jordan, Al is probably the most like all in. You know, I was like I'm just going to climb. That's what I'm doing. There's no thought of like career or education. I was done with school. I don't care. I'm done with that. You know, my family was like, are you crazy? Like you're either going to be a doctor or a lawyer, like take your pick, no problem. And I was like, you know,
you're free to do one of those two.
Exactly.
things.
You're going to have a real career, like, you know, and that's what you're going to do. And I just, you know, for whatever reason was like, I just wasn't even thinking about it literally. And I was like, didn't know how I was going to make money or make a living. I was like, I'm just going to climb. I don't know how, but that's all I'm going to do. So yeah, Clune was definitely an influence by travel and getting out. The weather was the other big influence. Like I need to get out of here because this place is terrible. You know, one of our first trips during the winter, we went to Joshua Tree, you know, and that was me, Jordan, Al driving to Joshua Tree, you know, 50 hours nonstop. Don't even shut the car off, you know, and then we spent the whole winter break there. Our first trip to Joshua Tree, you know, that's when we did stuff like Equinox and Acid Crack and, you know, lots of classic routes in Joshua Tree. And it was our first real trip, like out of the Gunks together and kind of realizing, one, there's places with really good weather and two, like a whole nother world. There's people with different ethics and we kind of bumped up against Backer and those guys and, you know.
Wow.
And yeah, it was interesting because the whole thing there was top roping. And we're like, why don't you lead this thing? Like, it's totally fine. Like it takes gear and because we're gunkies, like it takes fine. You just put some small nuts in, it's totally good. So that was our first kind of trip out of the Gunks, really. And then,
let me stop you. It must have been really interesting too for you to be able to go out there and, you know, at that time, like, you know, things like Equinox and those things are storied test pieces. And so I imagine for you guys to roll up and do them was probably like, oh, wait a second. Like we're good climbers elsewhere. Like,
yeah,
this does open up the world, you know, to us. I mean, was there that kind of attitude of like, hey, we can climb?
Yeah, it was kind of interesting, actually. I remember when you
guys are probably like, we already know.
No, we didn't know. We didn't know where we stood in the mix, you know? And like I said, we thought, well, we did Kansas City. I did Gravity's Rainbow. And, you know, those are my 512s I've done at that point or whatever there was or stuff like that. So I remember when I did Equinox, I remember like I almost onsighted. I was like at the top and I was like surprised myself. And I kind of like was bumbling, placing a nut and fell off. And then I was like, why did I even fall there? I'm so stupid.
The weight of Equinox made you fall.
Basically.
Yeah, you're on Equinox. You don't just fire
and that's
Equinox.
What I was doing. I was like, well, I'm all at the top. This is not right. What am I doing up here? And then I came down and then like, you know, I probably waited a half an hour, went back up and just did it. And I was like, this is not that bad. And then we were like, you know, what else is there? And the guy said, so whoever we met in the campground, I forget their names, but like, you guys should go check out Acid Crack. That's, you know, that hasn't been led. So we walked up there and we did Acid Crack same way. Like, look, there's gear. This is fine. And tried that. And we did that too.
Huh. Yeah.
Or I did actually.
Yeah.
Look at Jordan and Al didn't do it. Their fingers were getting chewed up.
Right.
And I think partly scan, like it just suited me.
Yeah.
Like my fingers were not getting chewed up. And those guys, that trip, both got gobies. And, once you get it, that's it. Like
Right.
they just keep getting ripped open.
Yeah.
I remember that was the topic of that trip. Like they just had these couple bad gobies and never got better.
Right. The history, I could be sitting here talking to Jordan and we wouldn't know who Scott Franklin was if he had not gotten those gobies.
Well, exactly.
And you had.
Yeah, exactly. No, that's the thing. And it was like,
it all pivoted on these gobies.
It really did.
The universe hinged on.
And those cracks are like, you always put your finger in the same way,
right.
And it's going to rip there. Yeah. And it was like a real pain because like you can't really tape because then you couldn't get your finger in there. And it was a bummer, but we still had an amazing time. And it was such a fun trip. That first trip, all the pallet fires and, just staying in the dirt for 3 weeks, it was awesome.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. It sort of launched a part of your brain into the
future. It did. Yeah. There was that was the beginning of, at that point, we went back to school after that for the spring semester, but that was the beginning of the end. That was school was kind of dwindling pretty fast.
I love the beginning of the end.
Yeah, it really was. That was I was much less interested in the spring. Let's put it that way.
Right.
Yeah. After we went to Joshua the first winter, that next summer when school ended, we went to Yosemite for the first trip together. And which is so funny to think about in context of like how Yosemite is today. I remember Jordan and I, we slept in our car in Camp 4 parking lot. Mm-hmm. With the bong on the dashboard. And what we would do for food is we'd buy like a can of corned beef hash and some eggs. And we'd cook right in front of the car in our little stove, corned beef hash and eggs, and just smoking weed right in the parking lot in Camp 4 and sleeping in the front seat of the car. Mm-hmm. And now, that wouldn't be a thing.
No, it's not a thing.
It's not a thing.
So this is like mid 80s.
Yeah, that must have been 1980.
Ish.
I want to say 84.
Okay.
And that was our first trip to the valley. And it's a funny time because Jordan's, when we went to the valley, Jordan, all he wanted to do was midnight lightning because he was a boulder. He's super strong. And all I wanted to do was El Cap. I wanted to climb long routes, free routes. I wasn't really interested in aid climbing at all. Mm-hmm. And so I was just trying to find, either get Jordan to do routes with me or Al. Al was really psyched on doing more like one pitch, trad routes. We're all of course, trad. And I remember more on the funny kind of climbs I did on that trip was I met this guy because Jordan wasn't psyched to do the West Face. I really wanted to do the West Face. And this guy we ended up calling Super Dave from Colorado met us and said, "Hey, when do you guys want to do the West Face with me?" Remember, been climbing for a year and a half from the Gunks, never been on anything long. The guy didn't know us at all. I was probably 18 years old. And he said, "You want to go do this with me?" I'm like, "Yeah, of course. No problem." Now, I had never climbed anything remotely like it. And he took me up. We said, "Okay, what we're going to do is we're going to bivvy at the base and we'll climb the first 2 pitches. And then the next morning, I forget what we did. No, did we climb the first? I forget what we did. We slept. No, right. We didn't climb the first 2 pitches. We just slept there that night because there's kind of a bit of a hike up to it, seemed like. And then we slept there. We left our sleeping bags at the base and we climbed the route in a day from there. And you remember, it took all day. And then we wrapped down. By the time we were wrapping down, it was dark. Got the rope stuck on the rappels. We just left the rope and hiked all the way down to the bottom. And it was the biggest day I'd ever had. It was the most amazing single climbing day ever. I guess more it's in hindsight, thinking how crazy it is that this guy grabbed me to do this route with him. And, I would never, ever go pick some random kid up in a parking lot and go on a route like that.
Yeah.
Today.
Yeah.
Ever.
Yeah.
But luckily it worked out.
Right.
And it's funny because I think the mindset was so much well, he says we can do it and it should be fine to do it all free. We did. I did the whole thing, flashed the whole route, no problem. And it was, it was a big day, but it wasn't the limit. And I just remember being so inspired by the whole thing. And, then the rope cycle was an epic. And then the next day he said, "Okay, you go hike up. I'll go get the sleeping bags. You hike up and get the ropes." And he told me, "Okay, you hike back up that gully and get it." And I was such a kind of a bumbler. I couldn't even find the rope. I couldn't even find the East Ledges. I didn't even know how we hiked up.
Right.
So he had to go back and find the rope too, because I couldn't even find it. But the climbing part worked out fine.
Right.
So
right.
it's just kind of funny because when I think about that perspective, so that must have been 1984. And again, like I did that same route since then, probably 3 or 4 times. I love it. It's, I've done it with my wife. I've done it with Steve Schneider. And then I did it with my son a few years ago, and especially doing it more recently, thinking it's kind of a big, long day, and there's some, involves slab climbing. Of course, it's more intense when you're old and worried about taking giant falls, and, then when you're 18, you don't care.
Oh, yeah. Totally. You don't care.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's just kind of funny just talking about it now, just thinking about that difference in time and perspective.
Right. And then that 84, 85, whenever it happened to be. So that would have been post Todd and Paul doing the Salathé.
No, they did that after.
Oh, they did?
It was after, yeah.
God,
that must have been like 86.
it was 87. Yeah, 86, 87. Yeah,
exactly.
That's right.
Yeah.
I was thinking I had 82 in my mind. But it was post Hudon and
for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it was in this, again, like this era of like people looking up there and thinking about freeing all those, the bigger routes on El Cap, but not quite kicking the door open yet.
Yeah, exactly. And like which
is again why the 80s are so cool. Like,
it is a cool time. And I think it was a weird time in that we were kind of sandwiched between like the real pioneers like Mark, and Max were, to me, those were like my heroes when I was reading Climb magazine about, free as can be and stuff like that. Those guys are super cool. They're really going for it. And then coming up with Todd and Paul going to Salathé but realizing those could go, you're on those walls, you're looking around, like, there's cracks all the way up here. There's holes.
Right.
Like these things will go.
Right.
You could see it. And it's just an interesting time.
I'm kind of curious about the European trips as well, because again, in this era, for a lot of climbers, Russ included, some of the storied trips, he went over those competitions.
Yeah, exactly.
But a lot of people from this era went over to Europe and then came back with like new ideas. So can you talk a little bit about that? Like what you guys did and what drove you to go there, and like how your sort of attitudes might have been like a little bit changed when you came back.
Yeah, and I'm trying to remember. I'm super vague on the exact sequence and timeline. But
that's okay. We can jump around. Somewhere
in that, so we went to Joshua Tree. That's that winter season, and I feel like in the spring. I'm trying to remember exactly when Russ Clune. I did Survival of the Fittest somewhere in there. I think that was like, I forget exactly what year it was.
Mm-hmm.
And then Russ did Thunderdome, which was kind of happening around the same time. I want to say a little bit after. And then the big spark was Patrick Elanger came to the Gunks.
Okay.
That was like a bomb landing. That's when that's our coffee maker cleaning itself out. Yeah.
The robot.
When Patrick came
for us,
I was already, like I said, like 99% done with school. Like my mind was like all climbing all the time. We met Patrick and it was like a nuclear reaction. Like I just realized, okay, I'm 100% doing this. And that was it. Patrick came to Gunks and proceeded just like, hike everything. Like no problem. I'd never placed gear before. I remember he walked up to Thunderdome, which we thought was a super test piece and, a little bit dangerous, kind of low to the ground, bouldery, kind of hard gear. He like just cruises up it like no problem, gets past the crux, realizes he doesn't have the right gear. We throw him up a nut, 25 feet, Gunks toss up, grabs it, places the nut, finishes it, super casual. And I was like,
très bon.
Oh my, exactly. And that was that, and at that time I had another project right next to Gravity's Rainbow that we were called Bad Boys, because we were trying to do a new route there. It was also really bad gear, like terrible. And I was trying and taking these really big falls, and Patrick saw us on it. It was like, basically, what are you doing? Like, you keep taking this fall up there, kind of horrendous fall into RPs and, massive whipper. It was like, you should try that move, learn how to do the move. And then when you get there, you can do it to the top. And so we're like, all right, you mean like put up a top rope and like try it on top? He's like, yeah. top rope up, then you can figure it out. And so we put a top rope. He just hiked up it. And then I did too. We put the top rope and I hiked it. It was like this move I couldn't get past. I just did like, no problem. And I didn't take time. Then eventually let it, of course. And that was like the beginning of like realizing, God, instead of like getting to the crux of something, taking a big fall and not being able to figure out the moves, like just work the move out. And that it was like also a big eye opening and really made us think about ethics, right? Because it wasn't like we were saying, I'm going to free solo routes. And if I fall off, I die. We weren't quite there. We were using ropes. We're using gear, right? We were playing the kendo game, right? We weren't full samurais.
Right.
And we were using the ropes, but we just did it in a really stupid way. We could use the gear. We could lower down. And our way of trying it was just super inefficient.
Right.
We're doing the same thing, but just very slow and inefficient. And it really, I realized, wait a minute, we're doing the same thing as he's doing, except we're just doing it stupidly. You know, it
totally.
really doesn't make any sense.
Right.
Like, why are we doing this?
Yeah.
And the ethic, I realized, like, I saw how the ethic kind of developed, and I still am a huge fan of the on-site ground up approach. It's the most impressive thing there is. But if you're not doing that and you're using gear, you're going to hang on the gear, then hang on the gear.
Right.
Hold me here. Don't lower me. Just hold me here and I'll try it from here to the top.
Right.
And it was a big turning point for us. You know, I remember Jordan was the one who was like, he was on board way before me. He was like, we're doing this. I'm like, no, Jordan, we have to like still do the scary, slow, stupid ways. No, this is the way to do it for sure. He's a Maver boulder.
This slow, stupid way.
Yeah.
We must do the
slow, stupid way and the scary way. And Jordan was all about the moves. Jordan was like a really strong boulderer, and he could always do, you know, any hard move, like no problem. And I remember it was like a big moment, you know, because I had done Gravity's Rainbow the old, slow, stupid way, and Jordan wanted to do it. And it was the first time that we had this interaction. He was like, "Hey, hold me here. I'm gonna." I was like, "No, you got to lower him." And he's like, "No, fucking hold me here." I'm like, "No, lower him." And we had this big fight about it. And then that was like, it was the beginning for me of like realizing he's right and we should do this. And then somewhere in there, we started doing that, you know, and it was after that whole season. And I think that next summer is our first trip to France. Right. So Jordan and I went to France. I don't remember why Al didn't come. He maybe had to work or something, but we went to France the first time. And yeah, that was
where'd you go? Like Bukes and.
So
I mean, it must have been, right?
We split up because
Jordan
went with his girlfriend and I went with another friend from who we climbed with from the Gunks. And Jordan and his girlfriend went to Bukes.
Okay.
And myself and Todd went to the Verdun.
Oh, okay.
And when I got to the Verdun, you know, we got there. I don't know how we hitchhiked. We took a train, hitchhiked to the camping in La Palude. We got set up. We woke up in the morning and I was like, this is heaven. This actually probably is heaven, but I didn't know yet until the next day when we got to the crag. So we got up to the crag. You hitchhiked from the town up to the crag, and we look out into the valley and was blown away and see people like top roping off the railings and, you know, lowering down, and just was completely blown away. Yeah, that was completely eye opening and truly like life changing moment for me.
Yeah, it's awesome. The Patrick encounter, it just like, to me, that just like gave me goosebumps, because I mean, he's an interesting character in terms of like what Americans know about him, but like the guy was a world mover in climbing. Absolutely. Like an absolute world mover.
Absolutely.
And so charismatic that I mean, I just imagine like the magnetism of like what he swept into the Gunks those days, and like how you guys were just like, holy crap.
Never seen anything like it.
Yeah,
nothing like it.
Because aside from his climbing ability, he's just was like this compelling,
he was a
superstar.
Character. I mean, he was like he was a star.
He was like David Lee Roth or something like that.
Kind of, yeah. No,
less flamboyant.
He had the personality, but he was like, you know, he was sort of the embodiment of all things that I was kind of feeling too, and like getting into like. Mm-hmm. I was a climber at that point. I'd already made the commitment. Right. I was like, I'm not looking back. And then I met him, like, oh my God, there are guys that do this. He is doing that. And he's got this beautiful girlfriend, and he's professional. He's traveling around doing this. This is what he does, is his job.
Yeah.
And you watch him climb.
And he's gorgeous.
And he's an amazing climber.
Yeah.
I've never seen anything like it.
Right.
And it was like next level, really, it was like an alien landed. And then going to France and going to Verdun and then meeting, European climbers and kids in like the campground and just hooking up with Spanish climbers and French and everybody and going to the crag and trying routes and like, yeah, hold me here. I'm going to do this move and then work it. And then red point and then do those routes. And I just was, it was truly heaven.
Well, it's interesting because, this like crucible that you guys met where you're hanging on the rope and like trying to do the moves. This, again, the 80s, this is happening to all sorts of climbers where they're doing these mental gymnastics to like both justify the old way takes all these mental gymnastics of like, and then to get to the new way, like you're like, this is dumb. We're using gear,
Yeah.
It's like, I don't know. I find it's like you have to go through this like period of like mental anguish and then like go ding, like, oh, this is how this works. But going to the Verdun, because I also agree that it's like this heaven place. And then you see like it was just mechanics. It was just logistics. Like, we have to go down from the top already to do these routes.
Right.
A lot of them don't even go to the bottom of the canyon. Most of them don't.
Yeah.
So why would we?
What are you going to do?
Right.
Pull the rope and like climb up and like, that doesn't make any sense.
Then you're stuck.
You're stuck.
You have to, like,
there's only bolts and the bolts are like 30 feet apart.
Right.
And
so it's like, you just realize it wasn't, it's always been set up as like, this kind of like the Euros were, wimpier than the British. Cause it was a big, like across the channel thing. And two things happened. First of all, you realize it was just logistics. This is how it had to be done.
Yeah.
And then you go and like, the sport wankers over there in France. Then you try to lead one of Patrick's bolted routes, and you're just like, this is fucking terrifying.
Yeah, you're terrifying. You're like, I am 25 feet above the bolt, and now the hard move.
Right. And then after the hard move is where the next bolt is.
Exactly. Yes.
After you've done it, because that's
then you can clip.
Yeah. Then that's totally.
And no, exactly. That first experience when you're like, I am completely terrified, super run out, and taking giant falls. Into the Verdun. Yeah. And you realize there's not a problem of like boldness. These are bigger falls than you've ever taken the Gunks.
Right.
So that, and I think very quickly the whole European mindset leveled out. The whole British, attitude towards the French, that all, through the next few years there, that quickly leveled out.
Well, because they all had the same
thing. They're all a bunch of wankers from, the French, and they're a bunch of
and then they went over there and they're just
like, holy shit, these guys are good.
And they're good, and this is fun.
And it's super fun, and it's, some of them are really bold and scary.
Right.
And I think there's a lot of respect. I think people realize, and I think Patrick Béraud, who is less known outside of France, but, equally, if not more talented than Patrick at Langeais, and some of the other routes that they were doing at the time were really way ahead of their time. And I think that's sort of like the general, you're talking about the 80s, one of the big sort of strange things, I guess, when you look back on time, is some of the things that were done then seem way ahead of their time.
Yeah.
Because there was a general sense of dissatisfaction. We were all like, oh, that's not that hard. It can't be that hard. I just did it.
Right.
But they were trying hard and like really focused. And now you look at those routes like, oh, that was actually hard. But I think the weirdest thing about that time was when I think back, again, from this, many, many years ago, because it is a long time ago, how I felt like we were kind of when I think back about it, I feel like we were sort of sandwiched in this feeling of like the Europeans and Patrick and that whole group of, especially at that time, French climbers were so strong and so good, and feeling like we just felt so lame. Looking at the average level of American climbers, like we were really not very good. Just, you're great climbers, of course, but nothing like the Europeans. They're way better.
Right.
They were climbing rings around us.
Well, I was thinking too, Ron Fawcett, the guys like that too.
Oh, yeah. Doing really scary routes. And, so I think the two things that they had going for them, one was climbing on limestone. Was the biggest revelation that like that makes you a better free climber. Mm-hmm. You learn way more variety of solutions. You're stronger, better route finding, just better skills, better footwork, just better climbers. Climbing on granite is great, and it's a great way to learn, but it's a very specific style. And certainly for free climbing, it's sort of limiting, and you can't get very strong on it. You can certainly do very hard routes on granite, but to get strong, I think climbing on limestone was a lot better medium. It's a lot more interesting and fun too, I think.
Well, the other thing is the ethics, because you talked about like, these things where you're just lobbing off of them. When you throw a top rope on it and it feels easy, then that's absolute evidence that it was a mental barrier.
Exactly.
It was not a physical barrier.
Exactly.
And, that's my kind of line. It's like trad climbing sort of substitutes scary for hard. And not always, but it's like...
It can.
Yeah, and it can. So, and, the U.S. climbing scene at that point, you're right on the cusp of sport climbing and things like that. It was having to get like pulled out of that in a lot harder way than the Europeans, I think. But the thing that's interesting that I want to talk about is that you have this realization, like, yeah, you guys are great climbers, but you guys don't even know like what great climbers actually look like. But then you actually go about sort of like, I mean, I don't know if it was a specific mission, but then your next kind of step in some of your climbing motivation, you become the guy that starts to fix that in a lot of ways. I mean, let's talk if we want to skip to that or move to it through discussion, but your Smith Rock era becomes like, oh, here's an American who's going to start, pushing right up against JB, right?
Yeah, well, it's funny you put it like that, because I think, like, again, I was so in it at that time. All I was like, I'm just going to climb, and I want to be the best climber I can be. And after the first trip to France, I was like, I'm doing this. Like, this is what I'm doing. This is how I'm going to climb, and I want to get better. I want to learn how to climb as well as I can. So that was totally my attitude. And then when I came back, actually, I remember that was actually a really interesting time. From that first trip in France, I came back to New Paltz, to the apartment I had with Jordan, and we had this other roommate who wasn't a climber. And I was broke, like literally broke, like $0, nothing, not one penny. I spent every dollar. I made it back. That was it. And I got to the house, and I remember thinking, like, I don't know what the fuck I'm going to do. Like, I got no money. I don't have a job, but I want to climb. And we were in the apartment just being our typical derelict selves. And I get a phone call from John Bouchard. And, this guy gets on the phone. Hi, I'm John Bouchard. I've got a company called Wild Things. I'm like, okay, I've heard of Wild Things. I've seen like their equipment or whatever, chuck bags. And he said, so I want to sponsor you. And here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to give you a monthly stipend. I'm going to give you a van. I'm going to pay for health insurance, and you can just go on the road and go climbing. And I'm going to drive down to the Gunks next week with this van, and I'm going to get you going.
You're like, who is this really?
Yeah.
Which guy? Who is this? Ha ha.
So it was really like the most and I remember Jordan in the hang up the phone, like, he's like, who's that? I'm like, that was John Bouchard. He's going to come down and give me a van, and I'm going to be a sponsored climber. And that was like the most hilarious and insane serendipity. It was like, I always think of it as sort of like that empty-handed leap into the void.
Well,
I took the leap, and then somehow,
people can't see me right now because it's a fucking podcast, but I'm like laughing and smiling before you finish that story, because I know what the story was.
Okay.
And in my biopic of this, my movie, we've got you like, sad music,
right? Exactly.
Like,
scraping the bong,
right?
Like,
scraping the bong, like they're walking down the alley, like kicking empty cans,
exactly,
like smoking a tiny spleef, that you like dug out of like,
and
then the actual, instead of the phone call, the actual van comes screeching up, because I know what the vans look like.
Exactly,
I've seen pictures of it.
Yeah.
The freaking Wild Things. I mean, it wasn't just you. There was like a crew.
Jimmy Surratt, Mark
Twite.
Yeah,
I've seen
and
the
Randy
van
Ratcliffe.
Picture.
Yeah. So
that's in the biopic. The van just comes up and beeps the horn.
Jump in.
And you just jump in. And
lots of gear and sleeping bags. Everything's like money, and, exact food, all the things you need. Yeah. Exactly.
But it's so cool because that guy was like, I mean, that didn't exist.
It didn't exist. It wasn't even a thing.
In the States anyway.
Yeah. But then it was. you know? And I remember just like laughing, like, okay, well, so that's what we're doing. I'm going to go climb here for the little, I forget exactly the timing of the year.
You're like, can you call in a pizza for me right now?
Exactly.
Because
you're so,
I don't know if I can last till the van gets here.
Exactly. And it happened. I mean, he literally came and brought the van to the Gunks, right. And I met him, and, you know, he's an amazing guy and became a great friend, and also a real mentor. And but that really opened up the opportunity, because he's like, you know, I was like, why do you want to do this? Like, how do you even know me? Like, I never even met you before. He's like, no, I've been hearing about you. I've been following you. You're climbing, and I know what you're doing, and I want to support you. And you're going to go do rad things. I'm like, here's the van, here's some money. Just go climb hard.
Right.
And so now I had this van, and I could go travel. And I was like, well, I'm definitely not going to stay here. That's for sure. And, you know, Smith Rock was like the logical place to go, partly because we knew it was like sport climbing and it was a really happening place. But I forget the magazine at the time. It was, I think it was called Mountain Magazine. And it just had like a number on it, you know, like a really great image, like full bleed image, and just had a number, which issue it was. And there's a picture of Alan Watts on Chain Reaction, and blue sky, you know, Chain Reaction just lit up. And I remember thinking, I need to go there. I need to do that route. I have to do this. Mm-hmm. And once I had the van, like, I'm driving out there, and that's what we're going to do. Ended up driving to Smith Rock, and that was another major, you know, mind, you know, altering experience. Absolutely. And getting there. And I remember being there for the first few nights. You know, the smell is so unique. If anybody's ever been to Smith Rock, you know, the sage and juniper, and camping there in the spring, and it was waking up in the blue sky. And I remember thinking, oh my God, this is in America, and the weather is amazing. Look at all this rock and this kind of climbing, and just falling in love with the place. And then getting to meet everybody, and, you know, that whole sequence was really incredible. At that time, I was with my girlfriend at the time was Cathy, it's a French girl. It's a different story. You know, I met back in the Verdun. So anyway, I got to Smith, and at that time, you know, Smith was really kind of like, Alan Watts, of course, was the, you know, really the pioneer, and had done all the routes at that time. You know, he had done Chain Reaction, done Split Image, was working on These Face the Monkey Face. All things were in that magazine article by Hans Zach. And I was just, I was like, I got to go there. Got to meet this guy. I got to see the place. And so, yeah, went there and just started doing the routes, you know, did Heinous Clang, and did, I forget exactly the sequence of routes, you know, worked through it. And then I was with Jimmy Surratt actually at the time. And there was also a couple of Brits. Martin Atkinson was there. And so everybody was like trying to, you know, do the routes, Latest Rage and Watts Tot, stuff like that. And I remember Jimmy tried Chain Reaction first. So I played him and I watched him. It was kind of like in the beginning of the on-site climbing. And at the time, I didn't really have any aspirations of on-siting Chain Reaction. I didn't even think about that really, because it seemed like way next level. But I remember belaying Jimmy on it, and he worked it out. And, you know, it took a couple tries. I don't remember if he did it at that time or not, but I remember belaying on it and I kind of watched the sequence. And then I was like, okay, I'm going to give it a try. And I knew I wanted to flash it, because I was jonesing to do the route ever since I saw the picture, and I did flash it. And I remember being like, still to this day, like so psyched to do this route. To me, was like the iconic sport route. I couldn't imagine anything cooler, you know, this perfect splitter rat. I don't know if you've ever been to Smith Rock. It's pretty dramatic. It's a short route, but it's just super cool looking. I remember flashing it, just being super psyched and just feeling like, you know, in love with Smith Rock and just the whole scene and being there. And then that afternoon, going down after that and meeting Brooke Sandel, who became one of my best friends and also major climb partner, and meeting him that day. And, you know, he was like, hey, who are you? Because, you know, the cool Smith Rock guys. Oh, who are you? I'm like, oh, I'm Scott, I'm from the Gunks. And, you know, like, oh, yeah. You want a bong hit? You know? And what'd you guys do today? This and that. And I said, yeah, I did Chain Reaction. And he's like, oh, cool. That's great. It's like, and I don't know how it came out, but it's like that I flashed it. And he was like, oh, cool. Like, yeah, of course, like, no problem. But he was super psyched. And I think we became really good friends then. And from there, we just, went. I became a local like overnight,
Right.
basically.
Right.
Even though I didn't stay there, but I was like, they clearly took me under their wing. Okay, you're okay. You can hang out here.
Yeah. Well, I think it's cool. I mean, I'll sort of like pay some compliments that might make you uncomfortable, but the fact is that like this is already the beginning of an era where there's plenty of climbers who get really good and they can go in and throw elbows and like annoy and kind of stomp on a local scene or like, and we don't have to name any names, but there's people out here for whom that was kind of their style. It's like a punk rock thing.
Right.
And I looking at your history, admired that you seem to be able to come into these scenes and do the right thing to sort of gather that energy around you rather than like piss it off. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I think so. And I think, maybe it's a personality thing, but I really felt like, when I met Brooke and then Chris Grover and Alan Watts, who really the crew there, and Kent Banish was involved and Sean Olmsted. There was like a crew of the Smith Rock locals, but I think they were like, yeah, this guy's cool. He can hang out with us. This guy from the Gunks.
Right.
And they could tell I was like really into it. They could really, and I think we had this really mutual respect for like really trying to climb well and really be into the art of it, and I just felt like we really had just met like kindred spirits. Like we were a crew for sure. And I felt it was nice to be kind of welcomed with them too. And so, yeah, it was not so much combative for sure. I was really super respectful.
Because I mean, it's like there's other little hot spots that maybe not quite as early as Smith Rock, but sport climbing's coming in.
Yeah.
It's in some places it's being pushed against really hard. So a lot of people, early sport climbing scenes, whether it's Salt Lake City or whether it's over in Rifle, they kind of like are pushed into adopting this like attitude of like, fuck you, we're going to do this anyway. And I feel like, somehow Alan, and I haven't ever had him on the show and I'd love to, but he seemed to somehow like, he just was doing his own thing. And I think maybe because Smith was so like out in the middle of nowhere, kind of
off
thing.
The beaten
like,
path,
yeah,
right? There wasn't a scene there. He was the scene.
Yeah.
And I could really relate to Alan in that way too, because he's just like head down. It's like, I'm just going to, he developed his own ethic because it made sense.
Right.
He wasn't just trying to follow like some paradigm or, he wasn't kind of part of some ethic that was being developed by other locals. He just developed it.
Right.
And by just small, by his own intelligence, right? And drive and vision, he could see like these things will be amazing. And he didn't care, by the way, if anybody knew.
Right.
It wasn't like, I want people to watch me do these things.
Right.
He didn't, nobody was there.
Yeah.
There's nobody watching,
Yeah. I think it's kind of interesting because isn't there like an American Zen writer, Alan Watts, as well?
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah. And I've always kind of like, in my mind, I sort of conflate the two, and I don't know what kind of personality he has, but I'm like, there's more than just like a coincidence there.
I know what you're saying. I agree. I agree.
I'm are they the same person? But I don't know anything about Alan Watts. Never met him.
He is.
Yeah.
He is a Zen master, and he's a super cool guy. I remember when I met him, you just love him, and Grover too. We just spent so many days in that park till dark. I mean, the thing was like we would leave there in the dark. You'd be coiling your rope up in the dark and walking out at dark, and that's what we did every day. And the thing that I think where we felt like it was we were such a crew, and where I felt such a good connection with them is there wasn't a sense of like we're doing this so people know that we're doing it. Didn't matter.
Right.
Like we were just doing it anyway. There was nobody there.
Right.
Again, same thing I think about Yosemite, but Smith Rock today it's insane. When we would be down there, there'd be literally nobody. There'd be the 3 or 4 of us there all day, and that's it. And now, I mean, there's not one single place with 3 or 4 people in it.
Right. Yeah, and people are warming up on your hard routes. So, just to like get the facts in and related to what I said about like you deciding, and actually that whole crew, I think, was very inspired by this idea that the Europeans are raging, and we need to like catch up with them. If not a conscious thought, but here we're going to adopt their tactics and we're going to do this thing and see how it works. And then also literally amongst you, JB Trudeau shows up and puts up the hardest route in America right there, like
that was definitely in your face, and I think it wasn't
to bolt or not to be is what we're talking about.
Yeah. And so that first trip I took to Smith was before GB came. And I remember just being inspired by the crag and the people. And then I went back to France. I forget the exact sequence, what happened. But then GB came and did to Bolt. I remember Clune telling me back in the Gunks, because I hadn't really quite committed to living in Smith Rock and the van at that point. Clune said, "Oh, GB just did this new route. It's going to be the hardest route in America. And you got to go out there and do it." Clune's like, "You need to go do that route. It's perfect for you. You can do it." And I remember thinking, okay, I'm going to go back out there in the fall, because I think we were in the spring, the first trip, and I went back in the fall after GB did it and just started trying it. But definitely the attitude, I think, in our crew at that point was the Europeans are way better than us and we need to like get on it because they're making us look super lame. And for the most part, Americans were pretty lame, they're just like fuddy-duddy, old, frumpy ass climbers, and the Europeans were like super fit, strong, better technique, more, they just in almost every way, they were better climbers. And, so that was the attitude. Like we didn't need to catch up. We need to get on the game here. That was our attitude. Like we were way behind the curve.
Right. And what was the process of doing that route?
To Bolt?
Yeah.
It's definitely the hardest thing I ever tried. I never tried anything probably quite that hard. No, for sure not. And then it became like, I think it took me like a whole month to do it. I went there and I want to say I started trying it like middle October because I did it on Thanksgiving Day. I do remember that. Right. That was like a big day because remember the day I did it, we went and had dinner with Chris Grover, Thanksgiving dinner. That was like, just happened to be Thanksgiving Day. So I had started like the month before. It took me a whole month to do. It was the longest I ever spent on a route. And it became like this big mental program because I was getting close to doing it. And the route is like kind of the first 10 bolts are like the hard business. And there's like the first little jug break. And I remember feeling like if I got to the jugs, I'm going to do this route. Like I'm going to make it to the top. And there was this hard move somewhere, I forget, 7th or 8th bolt that kept spitting me off, real small technical stuff and foot would pop or whatever. And then I started realizing it's just a concentration issue. Like there became this mental barrier because I realized that once I do this thing, I'm going to do it. And it became a big deal. I'd be like, when are you going to do it? When are you doing this? Is like a big topic. And it started to become like my first big mental project. I realized, whoa, this is like becoming a thing. And, but then, Thanksgiving Day, it was really cold and terrible in the park. And I remember Jeff Ellington, also one of our best friends, was there. And I think he belayed me on it. I was like, okay, I'll just give it a try and see, it's like terrible weather. It's super cold. I'll just give it a try. And then we'll be out here going to get dinner at Grover's house. And I did it. And I was like, oh God. Yeah. I did it.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's classic. It was great.
Like the low sort of expectations.
Yeah. It's the best.
Yeah.
And it was finally kind of got out of the mindset of like, oh, I'm going to do this.
Well, it's interesting because like, aside from the like invention of sport climbing and the bolt, right? And that's all we focus on. But then you guys are also like inventing red pointing. And like this sort of like science of it. So here you are a whole month on a route.
Yeah.
Like, that's like not even, that's nothing now.
That was insane to me though. Like the idea I was going to try this route like more than twice or 3 times.
Yeah. But then you like right away ran into everything we know now easily about red pointing is that like you work up this move in your brain and then it gets harder before it gets easier.
Exactly.
Like,
all the things.
Yeah. All the things like you were discovering. And it's funny because it's like, that's just so commonplace now. And it's like you guys, again, at least in the US, we're literally discovering this like, wait, this is really fucking challenging in this whole different way.
Yeah.
Like this whole different way.
Yeah. I learned the techniques.
Yeah.
I didn't know at that time, how do I keep falling here. What should I do? Should I go down and try it from 3 bolts below or what? We didn't know. And I was just like trying to find my way. I didn't know. I was like, why am I falling off here? Is it my shoes aren't good, or just all the things. So yeah, it was really eye-opening, because it was the first time I really spent time on a route like that. And I had to take rest days because my fingers were getting trashed, and I was like, I need to rest.
Yeah, it's funny that you're discovering rest days.
Yeah, exactly. All those things, like having to like really prepare and like think about the route, and like remember like even I probably had like drawn up the sequence, because there's so many holes, so many moves on it. It's a long route, and having to really remember it all so I could really prepare. And then doing it was a big change for me, because I think that route became a big topic, right? Everybody said, oh my God, first time Americans done, we're here. It was like the Americans we're in the game now. Right. We're not just the chumpy guys who are doing 511s, trad 511s. We're actually getting in the mix with the Europeans.
Right.
And I think people saw that as like the beginning. It was a big opening. Like we're in the game now. But we were also spending so much energy and time arguing about bolts still, right? And I remember, I think it was that same winter, they had the American Alpine Club meeting. I was invited to speak with the hangdog. I forget what it was called. I don't know, there was some like big debate, the great debate they called it, about bolting or not. And it was like me and Alan on one side and Calc and Backer on the other. It was a whole argument about why should we do sport climbing? Why bolting? And, I was super brash and super irreverent, and, in my own world, for sure, my context was so limited, but also in some ways it was really kind of pure, because I was just being honest about what I saw. And I remember being on the stage, and I'd never spoken to a big public audience before, and being on the stage, and this, people like Chenard and Robbins were there, and, everybody.
Yeah.
And they're asking me questions about, why trad. And I remember saying something like, why do you even need gear on routes less than 510? Like, why do you even need to rope up? Like what I said, it's like basically just some kind of like, some kind of form of like mountaineering, basically. Like you don't even need gear for that kind of, climbing starts at 510 was my attitude. Like that's when rock climbing starts, where you need gear. You need to put ropes on, and below 510, you don't even need it. And that was like, when I said that in front of everybody, they were like, oh, this big gasp goes through the whole room. And, I was like, and I was saying to like Backer and Calc, like, you got the routes you guys are doing, they're not hard. So you don't, basically, who cares? Like, it just doesn't matter that you top rope that, or that you let it, after hanging on a hook, and then you put a bolt in, you lower it back down, yo-yoed your weight. Like basically all things that I'd be able to come to the realization of that it was just slow and stupid.
Right.
This basically was my message. And
well received, I'm sure.
It was super well received. There was like standing ovations. Like they all got up and like, this guy, this is like the prophet. No, that's when I think I was like truly dubbed like the public enemy. That's when they realized this guy's, he's a menace. This guy's a menace to society. So, but I think they didn't know what to make of me, really. They're like, this guy is a little bit out of control, and they weren't sure what to think of me. And I remember that day, though, after the whole thing happened, that was the first time I ever met Backer in person at that event. And his whole posse, all these like SoCal dudes. And we were hanging out, I don't know where, in the hotel or something like that. And, just hanging out. And, I was a total pothead. So we actually had something really in common. And so really, I don't know what thing, like, let's go hang out and smoke some weed. And we did.
We'll hash this out.
What's that?
We'll hash this out.
But then
literally
we realized, and that was really cool meeting Backer, because we hit it off right away. And, we right then and there became really good friends, and with the whole crew, other hardcore trad dudes, Yosemite, J-Tree guys. They realized, I think they had respect for the fact that I was so committed to the art of climbing. Like, it sounded like this guy's serious. He's really into it. And that I think they respected that I was also go for it. They didn't realize I was like a top rope dude. I had soul survival already at that point, which I thought they thought was really cool. And had led other scary routes. I think they thought it was called lead acid crack because they hadn't led it at that time. So I was accepted by them too.
Well, I was gonna. I mean, you just got to it anyway, but I'll put an exclamation point on it. That's an important part of your career, which makes you a little different from like, you know, the Boone Speed and like in Salt Lake City and you know, some of the folks coming into rifle, and is that you had this like, I mean, you freaking, you know, what was what's the name of the route, the Gunks route, the 13A that you free soloed?
Survival of fittest.
Survival of fittest. Yeah. So you've done these things that like, I mean, kind of was right in Backer's wheelhouse, if not even harder than what he was doing in a way, you know. So you had these guys respect, and you couldn't, they couldn't just be like, oh, he's this little sport weenie that's scared all the time, and he puts bolts in because he can't climb.
Right.
So
no,
it's like,
true.
yeah, I mean, it's like you can't, you got some swagger like in the game, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I don't know about swagger, but I think they could understand it. They could see that I was serious.
Yeah.
And I think that Acid Crack was, those guys in particular, they understood what that meant. Mm-hmm. You know, they had never been to the Gunks, so they didn't know about survival, but understanding soloing 513 they thought was cool.
Yeah,
and they probably heard about it from other people, but they definitely knew about Acid Crack. Right. So yeah, I think that they realized I wasn't just a bolting dude and just a boulder or whatever. Mm-hmm. And they knew, you know, we talked about Yosemite and that I had done lots of trad routes. And so I think that we could relate in another way. Mm-hmm. I think one of the things that I love about climbing is there's so many different kinds of ways to approach it. Mm-hmm. And there's so much intersection about those different styles and the different geography too. Right. You know, Yosemite calls for one approach. Verdun calls for one approach. The Gunks is another one. So I think my interest has always been just in the art of it all, right? They're all different versions. Alpine climbing, same thing. It's you can't use the same approach as you do in the Verdun as you can on, you know, in Patagonia.
Right. Yeah. I mean, and the thing is that your evolution was an evolution that a lot of those guys, they ended up following it eventually. I mean, Kalk did.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, Backer to a certain extent, he
did.
Yeah. He wasn't gonna. Yeah. So it's like, you know, it's like you actually in this weird, I mean, not to like, you know, put you on a pedestal, but you're joking about how here's the prophet. It's like you and not just you, but were the prophets. You guys were talking about the future, and what you were talking about came to pass in a lot of ways for a lot of climbers. Some didn't, but the ones who stayed in the game and kept improving and, you know, and then it's funny because then Backer and like Kalk, they had to have their split in their years of like going a little bit different path and stuff too, you know. It's like, and that's what I mean, like this era was full of these moments where everybody had to like choose in a way,
right? Which is really so weird and in some ways not unfortunate, but there was so much enmity and really wasted energy fighting about shit that just didn't even matter, you know. And that was always my point, is like, look, if you just sort of break this thing down, this is where it's going to go. And the position was like, sport climbing it's a thing. It's going to happen. You're already going to the top. You can already get around to the back of the crag. It's not like you're trying to get to the summit of this peak, right? The natural intellectual evolution of it makes sense. We're already using gear. Let's do this. Let's skip all the gymnastics we're putting on ourselves and just go right to the essence of it and focus on. And then, you know, I use the analogy of kendo before, because that's how I always thought of it. Is like soloing is using samurai swords, right? You're playing to keep. Like if you fail, you die, or something grave. Kendo, like you're going to get a smack on the head, but you get to try again. And rock climbing with ropes and gear is kendo, you know. And to me, the trad versus sport is more a question of geography. Like in Yosemite, you use trad climbing because you can't actually pre-place the gear, right? But in rifle, it doesn't make sense. So you use the right tools, but that's the kendo approach. And I think then you want to perfect the art. You want to learn how to, you know, move correctly and approach it with the right energy, like, and commitment and follow through and, you know, really climb well. And the other stuff is just noise. Whether you went to the third friend or bolt and lower down or hung there and worked it out, that's just games we're all playing. But at the end of the day, the essence is still, did you climb it correctly?
Right.
with intention and commitment. So anyway, I think all that was to say is like, realize right away, this is where it's going to go. And once we could see the future was what it is today, right? For better or worse. I mean, when I look at the crag, you go to a rifle today and it's just packed with kids, end to end. And it's the downside of it. It is accessible. That's the other side of sport climbing.
Right.
It's super accessible. It's not the level of commitment required and training and skill and are way lower. It's way easier to get into. So it's a mixed blessing.
Yeah. There was like a much more definitive choice that automatically involved risk taking to become a rock climber pre-1990.
Exactly.
And it was like, I am going to accept that part of this is also pursuing risk. Unless you were just like a straight boulderer, but they hardly existed.
Right.
Even bouldering was fucking risky because no one used pads. So
right, and they're doing tall problems without pads.
Right.
Today would be like unheard of.
Right. So
No,
so it is. There is that evolution, which is, and it's kind of interesting because I think that was like in the back of the mind of all the anti-bolters, but it's also this like kind of detestable elitism too. So it's a mixed bag. Like I started climbing right then. I started climbing in 1989.
Okay.
And I was in the Front Range. And so I was in Boulder within a couple of years. And I wasn't involved in it because I was a Gumby, but I knew about the Bolt Wars. And that was, 91, 92. That was the height of the local Bolt Wars here.
Such insanity.
And I had that foot in the old world because I was like, like literally like wool in
Right.
wool, climbing in wool.
Right.
And so like I didn't have like a crucible evolution because I wasn't involved, but I was like evolving with it as well, in terms of like I stayed away from sport climbing for a really long time.
It was so weird that I think American climbing was held back for so long by our own sort of constructs, that we put out there. But, here we are now, right?
Yeah.
And now you fast forward and all that sort of water on the bridge. It really is just a cycle that we've kind of gone through. But, I think back to some of the arguments and we used to have with people at the crags and about stuff like this. Like, what are we even talking about?
Yeah.
Like, nobody actually cares either.
Yeah. Well, I just think like at our age, thank God for sport climbing.
Yeah, exactly. Well, now we can actually go out and climb and have fun. But yeah,
it's like, thank God I don't have to just like go risk my life every time I go climbing. I wouldn't be climbing. I don't think I would. I mean, I do dabble in that still because I have those roots, but I wouldn't be an avid climber without sport
It takes
climbing.
more time and energy, and it's like changes what you can do every day,
totally.
And I think it was definitely an interesting time, and I think the thing you brought up is the most interesting difference is like when I started climbing, risk was 100% part of it.
Mm-hmm.
That's part of the calculus of climbing.
It was the draw. I mean, it was
definitely you climb because you want to have adventure.
Yeah.
And climbing today is not about adventure. Sport climbing is not about adventure. It's about climbing. It's a physical activity. It's a sport. And, that was like the old John Sherman thing, like sport climbing is neither. It was such a great line. And I think I don't agree. I think it is a sport.
Yeah.
Sport climbing is a sport, but it's not climbing, in air quotes, right? Climbing in the adventure sense of climbing is a very different thing. Mm-hmm. And what kids are doing to prepare for the Olympics and you watch some of like the insane gymnastic, running, jumping, like game show. It looks like Japanese game show stuff they're doing in the Olympics now. It's funny that's climbing,
right?
It's a very different thing.
Yeah, for sure.
So,
well, let's finish your evolution because we've been at this for a long time, and I appreciate the time you're giving me, or giving us actually. And I knew about this reputation so this is all happening as I start climbing. So I'm reading the magazines and seeing all this stuff and seeing Jim Carn and you and Boone Speeds in the mix somewhere in the early 90s, and it's just like so radical and like the Lycra and all the business.
Right.
So I'm there watching this, and I knew that like there was sort of this bad boy attitude, and like these guys are a little bit dangerous, and and very like punk rock, if not literally, at least that attitude. And when I say punk rock, I'm talking about like anti-establishment because you were anti-establishment.
For sure.
Yeah.
For sure.
And so there you are, but then there's an evolution. First of all, you start just going around the country and doing fucking hard routes all over the place,
Right.
which is something, again, I totally respect because, and I think part of the Southern California problem is that. Like,
right, I agree.
Those guys just
They wouldn't leave.
stayed in their
Yeah.
lane.
Yeah,
And it's still the case.
Yeah.
But and so I'm like, okay, so that's a little bit risky to go out to these other areas, adopt the local ethic, and that's different from maybe what you were doing in this other place. But understanding that I'm going to roll in here and I'm going to do it the way it's supposed to be done, and still achieve, these ascents that you were achieving around. Was that a statement in terms of like doing that, like going places and kind of like doing the hardest routes or establishing them, or was it just like this is who I am now? I climb hard and I'm going to go climb hard on these different.
Yeah,
mediums.
I'd say more of that. I mean,
Yeah.
I was interested in like find the coolest crags and doing, always trying to find the coolest lines.
Yeah.
I mean, my thing was like I put up a lot of routes, but I don't think I was super prolific. I didn't do lots of routes. I like to do really good routes.
Yeah.
And like for me, at Smith Rock, when I first went there, I saw Scarface. It's like a line you can see from the parking lot. I love that. To me, like the lines that you can just see. So I was always interested in that. And going to crags, like when the New River Gorge was like it was on the radar. We heard about it, Brooke and I, like, oh, it's this incredible rock in West Virginia. It's the best rock in the country. Heard about it through Rob Turan at the time. I forget. Some other people told us about it. You got to come check it out. You guys could put up a bunch of routes. And we're going there and thinking, yeah, it's pretty amazing. And we put up a couple routes right away. And then, they actually brought us to the Meta River Gorge and we saw Mango Tango. Actually, Brooke had already left that point. I was with Lynn. And I was like, I got to bolt this route. Like I saw the line, like I have to bolt it. And they remember, being for guys that climb at Rifle or other crags, you have to do a lot of cleaning. Like Mango Tango, I wrap down the route. I put in whatever the 4 or 5 bolts that the route is. It's pretty short. You just put the bolts in, take a toothbrush to put some chalk in the holes and like start climbing on it. Like in an hour. Right. Like that. No wire brush, nothing. Yeah. It's like ready to go. Yeah. And it's the best rock in the world.
Yeah. Because Scarface involves some cleaning too.
Scarface is a little different. Yeah. Yeah. We should talk about Scarface because I think there's all kinds of lore about what happened on Scarface and why the name. Well, the name was actually because if the root looked like a scarp, that big face. Anyway, but there was when I started to bolt it and I wrapped down it, there's a big flake in the middle of the big corner. And it was Smith Rock has got these kind of like glued conglomerates of just choss. And the flake there was 2 things wrong with the flake. One, it was giant, but it was loose. It was never going to be, it would have to be glued on, cemented to the wall or removed. And I opted for the remove plan because I didn't have the glue technology for one, but it was so big. I didn't want to have a giant rest in the middle of the root because, you do these kind of pockets at the bottom and there would have been a big jug if the thing was stable and then you'd have the section above. And I thought it'd be way better root if it was just gone. And it turned out it was better gone because now it's gone. And how we got it off, we just turned it into a big epic because I thought, I'll just pry it off because it's really loose, but it kind of broke off in like pieces and it was just turned to a mess. I tried using M80s. I thought, we'll just blow it up and we taped M80s up underneath ridiculous. It. Yeah, it didn't do anything. It literally did nothing.
I think a physics person in college could have told you that, but
yeah, but we thought maybe they'll do it, And then actually Mark Twite was out there. They went up there, Mark and Randy, they jugged up the line. They thought, we'll use like an ice axe, and we'll just pry it off. They couldn't get off and ended up just being basically like kind of brute force with like, hammers and pry bars and got the thing off. So that's how it actually went. Right. But anyway, back to Mango Tango, which is, I only tell a story because I think you're asking like, it wasn't like I set out to go make a statement. It's like, we just went, the line just had to be climbed and it's awesome. And also more for people that put up routes, like it doesn't happen. I think where you can find a route where you literally do nothing other than put chalk on where the holes are so you can see them and you can climb on it. Like you have to do nothing.
Yeah. Yeah. Cause like Rifle, it's famously like,
it's their construction projects.
Yeah. Full construction projects. But yeah, I mean, so moving on from that, like, Franklin climbing comes in here somewhere. And I think of like the penniless kid, Bouchard calls him, gives him this lifeline. He becomes a professional climber. Also, I remember mentioning your family being like, what the hell are you doing?
Yeah.
So you're a motivated person. You're not like just a complete, I think probably you're not a hippie that's just like, I'm going to just like do this until, and sit in the woods. And so I'm just trying to like imagine like where there's this like, okay, I'm going to sustain this and I'm going to become a businessman. You're a businessman now, on a different business. So, but Franklin Climbing like fits into the lore too, because I think it was a very forward thinking company in some ways because you saw like the bouldering revolution before the bouldering revolution. Even not being that much of a boulderer, I guess.
Yeah, well, right. When we started, so Franklin Climbing was really an evolution of like, I was always, even all my time climbing, and after a while, I really became really involved with Matolia. And because part of the Smith Rock family and Brooke and Doug Phillips and, really spent a lot of time with them. And I've always been interested in design and, I'd say I'm entrepreneurial. I'm more than a business guy.
Right.
I don't even know what the difference is really, but I'd say I'm really a product guy. I have ideas around making things work, and I have that kind of engineering design sense, I'd say. So, in 1995, I'd already been sort of climbing full time professionally for however long that was, 8 or 9, 10 years, something like that. And was really feeling like, it wasn't 95. I don't know. I just felt like I need to do more than just climb. And I, not that my passion for climbing was any different, but I just needed more than just climb, rest. And I had some interest in other things, making things. And I thought, oh, well, I'll just start this company. We'll make climbing products and I'll still keep climbing. And that was the evolution. And, we had already done a lot of work at that time with Metolius, and I made a line of climbing holds. And really where the company started was making stuff for climbing gyms, making climbing holds and other products around that side of the business. That's where it started. I remember starting when we wanted to have the idea of building a climbing company, I wanted to call it Acme Climbing. We thought, we'll call it Acme Climbing because, then A would be the top of the list. And, all this, we were joking about like, we'll make it really interesting. People said, are you fucking stupid? Like everybody that climbs knows your name.
Right.
And that's a really important thing when you start a business to have name recognition.
Right.
You should call the company Franklin Climbing and then you'll have customers. And I was like,
it's
okay.
Still pretty up there on the alphabet.
It's still pretty good.
Right.
Exactly. So we were like, okay, all right,
beginning.
fine, we'll do that. And, through the time, all the years of climbing and being involved in the industry with Metolius, had great connections and we launched a company. And I remember, we had a connection with REI at the time and, they became a customer right away. So of course, if you make products, we'll buy it and then we'll put it in the store. And so they gave us some orders to start making holds for the REI stores. And I remember we were like we knew how to make stuff, but we didn't know how to do the business side. And I remember we made the first order shipped to REI and then we realized, how do you get paid? We didn't know how you like actually get the money from REI,
Yeah, I had the same problem when this thing started making money. I was like, okay, so then
what?
Do I just call them up and say, hey, you guys are going to give me that money or how do I do that? They're like, you invoice us. I'm like, okay.
Exactly.
I was like, okay, so then.
What does that mean?
Yeah, so then I downloaded the Word template, invoice template. And I was like, okay. So I put my address on here and then what do I do?
Yeah, exactly.
So,
we did that.
Yeah.
So since then, we've learned a lot about business.
Right.
But yeah.
Well, that's good.
Yeah, it's really good.
Yeah. But I mean, product wise, it's cool. Like climbing, it's like bouldering pads,
all those things.
Yeah.
And chalk and holds and clothes and all those kind of things that we thought like people would need, and that we would kind of solve those problems and make it cooler and better.
Well, and I think part of the deal too is that I think anyway, and there's you guys and Pusher, was somewhere probably a little bit past you guys, but. All these companies, and you included, Pusher more so, I think, but realize that there is this like style to climbing.
Sure.
And like, again, like kids like me that were wearing wool and like, trying to look like Royal Robbins. Like, That was like there was this new thing, and I think maybe took some hints from skateboarding, some hints from surfing. Like there was these pursuits had created styles that went around him, and I feel like Franklin was like kind of an early dabbler in that.
For
idea
sure.
Of like, well, what does a climber wear that's not just about function?
Yeah.
You know? Not
function
just
for sport climbing.
Yeah.
What does that mean?
Yeah. It doesn't mean it means you can wear cotton.
Yeah.
You know, like the death cloth.
Exactly.
Were, right. The mountaineer's death cloth. Like,
exactly.
I'm not wearing cotton. It's like, actually, you know, Smith Rock.
It's raining. You're going to go to the car. You're going to leave.
You're going to leave. So your cotton hoodie's fine. Dude.
Exactly. Yeah. You're not bivvying on the North Face. So
Which
fine.
I sent you a picture of. I got my hands on a vintage Franklin hoodie.
All right. Nice. Yeah, that's right. Exactly. Yeah.
Anyway, but so, you know, that's kind of like the cool thing about that. I mean, it was successful. You know, you sold it to BD.
Yep.
Was that just again about moving on to something different?
Starting Franklin climbing was like my business, my bachelor's degree in business.
Right.
Because, you know, we just went from climbing to doing business, and we learned a lot about how to run a company. And then when the whole BD interaction really was like my MBA, that's when I got my master's. That was my real world schooling and how the world really works. Some hard lessons for sure. Big interaction with Peter Metcalf, who is he's a real businessman, and I'll put it that way.
He's the PhD. He's on the PhD.
He's PhD. He's sort of, yeah. So I'd say that interaction taught me a lot. And I think, you know, when I look at now that we're, you know, been in business for a long time, it was a real world MBA. You know, I look at people that say they have MBAs today. I'm like, you don't know shit about business. You have no idea what actually goes on, what the real pressures are and what decision making looks like. And I think going through that process with Peter, both watching him and the team at BD and learning from BD, but also being on the other side of that kind of interaction was pretty strong. And BD took over at Franklin, and we actually moved the company down to Salt Lake City. We lived in Salt Lake for a little while. And in 99, I had a bad paragliding accident, and I was pretty broken. I was working at BD, and I was really fucked up. That was like the turning point for me, like realizing I need to get the fuck out of BD for one. I really can't be here anymore because it's sucking the life force out of me. And the other thing was Salt Lake City is a great place if you're single and you don't have kids, or you have kids and they're Mormon, but kids that are not Mormon, it's a hard place to raise them. You know, our son was 2.5, and, you know, we realized, well, what are we going to do? We can't have play dates with our friends at school because they're not in the church. And it was super weird. And then the weather's terrible, the inversions, all those things, you know. So all that combines, like, it's time for us to get out of Salt Lake City. So we, when I was recovering from the paragliding accident, I was kind of reaching out to my network and finding, you know, basically any kind of lifeline out of BD, and ended up taking a job with Sportiva at that time and moved to Colorado. That's how we moved to Netherlands. So came here and, you know, worked for Sportiva for, I don't know, maybe 5 or 6 months, and then started doing my own thing again. But it was great. And it was a good opportunity to kind of get out of Salt Lake City and sort of change the channel.
And what's your own thing now?
Well, now we, so for that period, I was working doing independent design. I worked for Petzl and for Montreal doing design development stuff. But in 2006, I started a solar company.
Were you involved in the Montreal's climbing shoe?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. I did
short-lived
thing. And, you know, that was also interesting experience of working with them. And, you know, they also became acquired by Columbia. And I think, you know, at that time was some of the guys there they wanted to get into climbing, but, you know, that's a long-term commitment, right? You're going against people like Sportiva and Scarpa. They're, you know, 100+ year old companies doing it. Yeah. Like, you need to be committed, you know, it's not just like a 2 or 3 season thing.
No, I literally remember quote unquote Montreal climbing athletes that when the cameras weren't around were climbing in Sportiva shoes.
Yeah, so. Exactly. Because it takes a long time. You know, you got to develop shoes and product and all the things that go around it. Right. And very, you know, and then they got acquired, and it all kind of ended there. Ice boots too. We're trying to make boots with crampons, and, you know, Jim Donini and myself were like kind of with helping them with development stuff. So yeah. But yeah, now we start a solar company, and that's what we do. We make solar products. And when I started that company, really at the time, I was like kind of looking around at my life and going, spending a lot of time in China, doing product development at that time for Petzl and for Montrail, and traveling back. And I had 2 kids at that point. They're both really young. And I was thinking, what am I doing with my time? It's a finite time we have here, right? I was kind of just doing that inventory on life and saying to myself, like, what can I tell my kids I'm doing when I'm traveling to China? Like, I'm making climbing carabiners and climbing shoes. Like, that's what I travel away from you for. Meanwhile, this was like during Bush 1 and Bush 2. I was freaking out politically. And I was just trying to do this kind of gut check going, what can I do with my life that I could at least say to my kids, I'm at least trying to help this fucked up world. I'm not just solving problems for people that don't have them. Climbers don't have problems. If you're buying climbing stuff, you're doing fine. And making your climbing shoes better, it's a great problem, but I felt like I could maybe do something a little bit better. And so I did this whole inventory and said, what can I do with my time on this earth that I can at least say was helping move in the right direction? Not solving the world's problem, but at least I could say my efforts were going to making it better. And I did this reverse engineer exercise. With my capital that I had available to me, my skills, my what can I do? And I came up with the idea of building solar products and basically prefab structures. It'd be like a little cabin with solar panels and batteries that could be deployed for like remote locations, cabins, hunting, skiing, disaster relief, things like that. That was the concept because I'm a product guy. And I built the prototype of that. And it was called I called it Lighthouse Solar. That was the name of the company. Like, I'm going to make these little lighthouses. So I started down this road building, I left Montreal and Petzl and I started doing this. And everybody like, are you nuts? Like, what are you doing? Solar what? But I really wanted to be part of the world at large. I felt like I just spent my whole adult life in the climbing industry.
Right.
And I thought, I want to be part of like the world outside where people don't know me. Mm-hmm. They don't know Scott Franklin as a climber. I'm just like a guy and I make these things. And that's where it started. Ironically, one of the first customer I had, this guy up on Magnolia Road, called me and said, hey, can you come down and I want to do solar on my property. I've got an organic herb garden. I was like, oh, of course, organic herbs. Yeah, no problem. Magnolia Road. I understand you. No problem. Be right over there.
Wink, wink, nod, nod.
Yeah, exactly.
Say no more.
I go down there. Well, funny thing is,
and it's like actually herbs. You're like, oh,
exactly.
Cool.
No, it literally was. So like this super hippie guy, this beautiful family, all the naked kids outside, long hair. I'm like, yeah. So where's the herb garden? And they showed me like, oh, they actually are herbs. Like, and but the funny thing was, he found me because he's a climber.
Right.
So I'm like, dude, I'm trying to be like outside of the climbing world and like. But it worked out great. And Josh Elmore is his name and became also one of my best friends and went out to do lots of cool stuff. So it was kind of fun. I was trying to get out of the world at large. My first real solar project was with a climber guy.
That's funny.
Yeah.
It's like, I'll buy this thing for me, but you have to go climbing with me.
Exactly.
You're like,
so,
shit.
Yeah.
All right, fine.
Fine, no problem.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's cool. I mean, it's evolved. It's successful. It's a living. It's and it's forward. It was forward thinking,
Like it's the same kind of evolution design thinking, like how do we make things better? Mm-hmm. How do we make things, make a better design is like all about like, how does it work better?
Right.
Because, that's always the problem you're trying to solve. And I think that's what we do, So right now we make architectural solar products. It's kind of our niche. So we don't compete with the big Chinese guys and, the giant multinational corporations. So that's what we do.
And the van life climbers like Jordan Cannon are still hitting you up. Can't get away from the climbers.
Exactly. It's not a problem. Now it's like, a different version.
I looked at his rig, dude. I was like, he's like, I don't even understand how this works. Scott put it in here. I don't really know how it works.
Yeah.
It's way different than mine. We started about how like I spotted you and got all excited. And part of the thing is, it's like, I like see climbers who've been at it for a really long time. Guys like you who are at the top of the game. And then I always, part of my investigation on this podcast and everything else is like, well, what does climbing mean now? And then also like when and where was it healthy and where was it unhealthy? And for a lot of people later in age, especially someone who climbed as hard as you did, you were the best climber in the United States at what you were doing for a while. Sometimes the come down from that can be really difficult. And people get out of climbing because they're like, well, my performance is lagging. It doesn't give me what I want anymore. So, you know, I've interacted with you in rifle since. You've got your son who was into it, and I think that's really healthy. And, you know, having a relationship with your son through climbing is usually a pretty cool thing. And so it's like brought me a little bit of joy to be like, yeah, Scott's still doing it. This is cool.
Oh, yeah.
And so, like, don't dispel that for me. Tell me what climbing means to you right now. You're just like, I hate it. I'm always injured. It sucks.
Oh, it's the same for me.
Right.
Honestly, climbing's, I love it, you know, and I think I don't climb as hard as I used to, but I love it more. You know, I think I get more out of everyday climbing. What I feel like is as you get older, life is like you have this backpack, right? Now I've got a business, I have family, I'm a lot heavier mentally, right? I got a little more going on, and I can't just like throw it all by the wayside and just like, I'm just going to do this route. I don't fucking care. I'm
dropping my backpack off. I'm leaving it.
Exactly. The backpack's harder to take out, but it's also interesting, different mental challenge. Like how do you know, and also the other thing that's interesting that I've been doing a lot more recently is injuries. Like, you know, I've had my share over the years. It's a hard game, you know, physically it's a hard game. And as you get older, that collection of injuries is compounding. It's like compounded interest. It actually increases. So you know what can go wrong a lot more, you know? So I'm more aware of that and taking big whippers and weird falls and, you know, especially trad climbing and or adventure mode. You're just, you know, a little bit more, I don't know if cautious is the word, but yeah.
I mean, because that's still in your life too. I mean, we're talking about rifle, but I mean, you were out on El Cap not too long ago.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. I mean, it's still, and I spend more time in the mountains now than I ever do. Cause now, you know, as I'm getting older, like ski touring, alpine skiing, you know, skiing the mountains is like, I spend a lot more time now than I used to because walking uphill slowly is more enjoyable to me than it was when I was like 18. I've always done it, but now I really like it, you know, and spending long days in the mountains is, I need to do that.
There's an Enormocast phrase that I coined, which is that those are like just walking somewhere is the long approach to nowhere.
Yeah.
Which is just absurd when you're 25. Like, where are we going? Why are we walking?
Yeah, I hate this. Yeah. Now I seek out those long walks, you know, the longer the better.
You know, you also married a climber and someone who, you know, had her own career.
Yep.
And so, I mean, you have a climbing family. And
absolutely. And, you know, it's cool because we, you know, it's one of the things that Gia and I share, and we love to climb together, and we have so much fun, and she's definitely a sport climber. You know, I've made her do routes like the Bakariarian and things like that in Yosemite, and she's done them on, you know, follow them. That's about it. And begrudgingly, we've climbed like in the Dolomites.
Well, making
together.
her belay that is quite a ask as well.
Yeah.
I mean, I think.
And she's game, you know, she's game, but to a point.
Yeah. As you've seen videos of dudes get like completely smashed into that roof and shit on that route when they're belaying, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So sport climbing, she loves sport climbing and, you know, just as much as ever. So I think, you know, back to your question, I think when I think back about climbing for me, like it's still the same magic. I think whether you're climbing 5'10" or 5'14", it's the same feeling. You know, in that moment of like doubt, to me, it's always about that moment of doubt, like where you're about to fall off, like what's going to happen? What do you do then? That's the interesting moment. You know, it just comes down to like, do you climb through that or do you fall off and take, you know, or do you take, which is, you know, you succumb to it. And I think that's the interesting moment. So whatever level, and you know, now I don't climb as hard, but you still get to that same point, you know, and it's a really interesting moment. I think, as you get older, you're more aware of it, I feel like, and understand how you approach that moment and what you do with it.
All right, folks, thanks for listening, and thanks to Scott for doing that. Went to his house, sat down, got it done face to face. However, Scott was not done. We have an addendum episode coming out, an in-between episode, a bonus episode, but not really a bonus because you guys don't pay for this shit, so it's not really bonus anything. Every podcast is a bonus when it's free. We'll call it a tweener ep, coming out in a couple days to follow up with Scott on a couple things that he said he missed. He wanted to get in there, particularly shouting out some more friends. He stood on the shoulders of a lot of great climbers of that era. He wants to make sure and acknowledge that. All right, folks. Thanks for coming to the show. Let's get out there and have some fun, huh? Weather's good. Let's do it. And, of course, check your knots.
Why don't you get a job, Spicoli?
What for?
You need money.
All I need are some tasty waves, a cool buzz, and I'm fine.